Okay, and next we have Darian X and Adilka Pimentel from Make the Road New York. Make the Road is an organization that builds the power of Latino and working class communities through organizing, policy innovation, transformative education, and survival services. So Adilka began at Make the Road in 2003 as a youth leader and has transitioned to a staff role and currently is working on a political education curriculum for youth of color ages 14 to 21. Darian is a youth leader and a board representative at Make the Road. He has participated in citywide campaigns around school discipline and police reform, and he recently presented the work that they're talking about today at a White House forum. So please welcome them.
So peace. Again, my name is Adilka, and I am a community organizer from Brooklyn, New York.
Peace. My name is Darian. I'm a youth leader and board representative. Make the Road.
So, you want to push? Okay. So, Make the Road, like was mentioned, is one of the largest nonprofit organizations in New York City. And we've partnered up with Researchers for Fair Policing, which does a lot of participatory research. And we're going to be talking about discriminatory policing. So in New York City, the system that is in place is called broken windows policing. And pretty much when you think about broken windows, right? So young people over several generations have been growing up policed in the city, invested in broken windows. So what is broken windows policing? In a nutshell, it focuses on minor quality of life offenses and misdemeanor arrests with the faulty assumption that it prevents or lowers serious crime. How does broken windows affect young people and other folks of color, right? So there's a disproportionate target. It's, a lot of folks are left with a dehumanized feeling. In extreme cases, you get physical violence and death. In the case of Eric Garner in Staten Island last year, it was initially a stop, and then it led to Officer Paneli A putting Eric Garner in a chokehold and eventually murdering him. So that's in that. So the process of stop, question, and frisk, being asked for an ID, being told to move from corners or any places that you are, and other forms of police surveillance are common tactics of broken windows, right? And it's pretty much responsible for more than 20 years of aggressive policing in our neighborhoods. And I really want everyone to just think about who is affecting and in what way it is affecting them.
Dope. So like Adilka said, like broken windows, can everybody hear me? Nah, all right, cool. So like Adilka was just saying, broken windows is a policy that's been around for more than 20 years. Our current police commissioner created the policy of broken windows policing. And just so we're not confused, stop and frisk is broken windows. It's under the same policies, under the same practices, the same institution. It's followed in the same programmatic way. So when we did our research with Researchers for Fair Policing, what we wanted to do was figure out the exact numbers. So from this, we saw that almost more than 53% of young people, of people stopped by the police via broken windows and stop and frisk policy. 53% of that number was young people, and 83% of the young people were Black and Latino people. And so basically what this is showing is the hotspots of where the NYPD themselves has said that stop and frisk took place more often. So, and this dark region here is like the middle of Brooklyn. Up here is parts of Manhattan. I think that's Harlem in the Bronx. So these are the areas that we then went into to do our survey and do our analysis of what was going on. Let me backtrack a minute because I feel like I skipped a part. This project was entirely young people led. The surveys were based on young people's experiences, and we wanted to track and understand how young people were interacting with the police, or how the police were interacting with young people, and the sentiments and attitudes that were coming out of this.
So when we talk about young people, right, we talk about young people leading and being frontline in the movement. And we talk about that in a sense because they're the ones who are living these stories. They're the ones who are dealing, right? So to just give you a breakdown, we're part of a coalition that's called Communities United for Police Reform, or CPR, which was founded in 2012. And it's basically a mesh of advocacy groups, nonprofit organizations, lawyers, researchers. It's a big mix of people. So we had 3 lawsuits. It was Floyd, Ligon, and Davis that ultimately sued the city of New York and won. Now, what that lawsuit proved or that practices like stop, question, and frisk were disproportionately targeting people of color, right? Predominantly young people, whether it meant getting trespassing tickets in public housing, whether it meant getting stopped all the time, whether it meant getting roughed up, it all fell into the same categories. So like Darian mentioned earlier, we have a new mayor, right? Mayor de Blasio, who's progressive, but we have the same police commissioner who implemented the broken windows policies decades ago. And so from the lawsuit, we had a few reforms, right? Body cameras, we had a joint remedies process, which is a long-term way of trying to get communities that are affected and police in a way to try to better community relations, as well as immediate reform policies, which gave us the opportunity to sit down and actually look at what's the training manual, right? What is the NYPD, training these new recruited officers to go in with these implicit biases and then interact with people of color in communities. As well as a few more things. And then, we're in a moment right now with unprecedented momentum in cities and communities of color against police brutality, right? And last year, when the non-indictment of the officer who killed Mike Brown came out, there were like sparks and protests every day in New York City. And then December 3rd, there was a non-indictment of Officer Panelists who murdered Eric Garner. And we were part of a crew who came together and led 10,000 people in New York City the day after. We called it 12-4, to kind of, express that outrage. And Darian was actually one of 36 people who was involved in a civil disobedience and blocked the Brooklyn Bridge. And we were led and supported by mothers of folks who've been killed by police as well. So who we are, right, in a sense. So we're Make the Road New York and Public Science Project, which are professors at the CUNY Graduate Center who kind of come together and work and do research. And we'll get a little bit more into why data is so important in activism, in organizing, and why it matters. But it began in the summer of 2012. And not only were youth the ones who were based off the surveys, the youth sat and created these surveys, sat and went and distributed surveys to other young people in the city, just because to emphasize the importance of peer interactions and to emphasize that the young people are the ones that should be in the front line.
Okay, so what we did with that, like Adilka said, we created a survey, but including the survey, or in addition to the survey, we did youth interviews and testimonials where young people actually sat down and talked about their experiences with policing. It's like we had a lot of different young people, me being one of these young people. As soon as I got to Make the Road, I began in this process. And I gotta say, even that part of the process is really powerful and really impactful. We created like it says here in a fancy way, interactive digital research archive of these young people's experiences and these young people's testimonies. So we could then disseminate that, it wasn't like young people were just sitting here talking to us, researchers or whatever the case may be. But the world could actually see their information. So we also worked on analyzing public NYPD data, meaning that we didn't just want to go and reinvent the wheel, as if like this data set or information wasn't available or wasn't around. We actually wanted to take the information that the state was saying was accurate and challenge that to our own youth data, the people who are actually experiencing policing firsthand and on the streets. We tried to go into this with a completely different type of methodology. We didn't want to perpetuate the same social stigma of research, which is cisgendered white men doing research on communities instead of doing research with communities. So young people actually had the chance to go into the CUNY Graduate Center and learn the statistical mapping programs and how to analyze data both qualitatively and quantitatively. And so after we distributed the surveys, we distributed over 1,000 surveys, and they were to 14 to 25-year-old. And we wanted to focus on Black and Latino folks. We understand that policing as a challenging issue is affecting multiple people are in this country right now. But we understand that the most impacted and the most affected are Black and Latino and indigenous communities. So we only focused on Black and Hispanic youth in our analysis of this data set. And like I said before, we did video testimonies. And so also, like I was saying earlier, this is the, I guess, counterpart to the NYPD map that we showed you earlier. This is where we went and took our data. So if you go back, it is almost identical to this map. So it wasn't like we just wanted to go into neighborhoods or communities that never had experience of policing, or this is not where the NYPD was prominently located. We wanted to go into the exact neighborhoods where young people were being stopped and searched and frisked and harassed in their communities. So we learned three main things from this report, or from this research process. We understand, as we knew, and I think a lot of these points are things that we use to confirm our own ideas around what was going on in our communities and our own realities. So police are constant present in young people's of color's lives, you know. They're constant presence in their public spaces, meaning parks, playgrounds, the street, public transportation, trains, buses. The police are constantly there, and young people are constantly feeling over-policed. The police are constantly by their homes. So we had a lot of young people who participated in the survey who live in public housing projects. And the police are constantly there in New York. They practice a policy called vertical patrol, which is police going from the top of public housing buildings and going through the hallways, going all the way down and stopping and searching and asking for IDs of folks who live in public housing complexes. And in the school, what we know in New York City is that if we took all the police officers in New York City public schools alone, that they would be the 5th largest police force in this country. So there are over 5,000 police officers in New York City public schools policing young people. And so the second thing that we learned is that young people report this abundance of intrusive and unwanted and often very negative police contact. So the NYPD, I don't know if you can read this right here. The NYPD reported that 9% of the stops on young people resulted in a search. However, out of our survey, we saw that 46% of the times that young people were stopped, it led to a search. So clearly, this extreme difference, and this is why we wanted to use the NYPD data in the first place to compare it to what we were saying, and so we can use it in a more substantive legislative fight. Yeah. And then after this, like young people, this is some of the reports that young people had or gave us back from our survey. So 42% of those young people of color reported experience disrespectful and often offensive engagement with the police. Some young people reported things like the officer asked if I had any bombs on me because I looked like a terrorist. I was told by an officer to shut up, you little fag. The officer said, come here, Mexico. The officer said, those niggers don't know any better. And so this is the regular interaction that young people are having with police officers. I know one of the most violent interactions I've had with a police officer, they told me, niggers don't have any rights. So this is the reality that young people are reporting saying or having with the police. And lastly, our research suggests that there's an overall sense of surveillance and overall mistrust of the police in the eyes of young people, you know. 74% of the young people of color said they feel targeted by police. 52% reported feeling generally unfavorable towards the police. And I feel like this data set actually shows that a lot better, even with young people who had no police contact, even with young people who had quote unquote positive police contact. We still saw that young people have very negative opinions of the police. They were young people who don't feel like the police are fair, and even with young people who haven't had experience, 27% that they feel like the police are unfair. And it just continues, and it is obvious to us.
So along with some of the research, just to kind of give a little bit of a sense of what else we've been involved in, Jose Lopez was my mentor and a really, really good friend of ours, was appointed to Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, and was able to take our voices as a community and put forth that, and they came out with a report with recommendations. I am appointed to a joint remedial process advisory committee that consists of 18 people, including community members, including 4 of the highest law enforcement's clergy members, and Judge Bellin, who's this monitor that's supposed to be kind of putting this all together. And the purpose of this committee, and it's still underway, is to try to come up with recommendations to better communities and police and that relationship. As well as Darian and Brett Stout, who's also a good friend and a researcher, have used the data that we've shown, right, and spoken and testified in front of the policing task force and the New York City Council. With the data that we've collected, we came up, and I mean us too, and a bunch of the young leaders that I mentor and that Darian helps as well. We created what was called the More Than a Quota pop-up exhibition. Right, we wanted to reiterate that we as people of color, we as young people are more than a quota, right? The police have a quota system they must meet every month. So we see the overall aggressive distribution of summonses or arrests. And in this exhibition, we actually, put the data out, and there was creative performances and just like a display of the data we've collected. And Researchers for Fair Policing has been a part of Make the Road in our youth. Every summer we have a youth power project where we take the leaders that work with us during the school year, and we kind of have an intensive. And it just keeps building the interactions between young people and research, right? Like Darian said, they actually go and they embody what it means to be a researcher versus being told or being taught. They actually get to do it firsthand. So that's a picture from the exhibit that we had in an art gallery in Soho, which is really, really cool. And that's us doing some work during the summer. So just to close off, there are 8 lessons that we kind of took away with this, right? The one that we prioritize a lot is that research and activism go hand in hand, right? So it goes hand in hand because these are the folks who are living this, right? Darian, who's been stopped by police over 100 times in the last 5 years. All the Black boys that I mentor that I need to constantly tell and deconstruct, this isn't your fault. It isn't a problem. Being a Black man, it is a beautiful thing. There is a system in place that is constantly trying to keep you down, and let us break down these systems and learn to re-love ourselves and, just heal from trauma, because it is literal trauma, right? To walk down the street every day and get stopped and harassed, to have a cop go in your pockets, right? Every day, whether you're a man, I've been stopped and harassed as a woman, and they don't believe it, right? It's like, oh, you're a woman. It happens, right? And just really politically deconstructing what it means to be Black or brown or indigenous in America in this time, right? Yeah, that's your point.
And so what we found both confirms and kind of complicates some of our prior theories. Like we said before, this was a very nuanced project and very nuanced issue. I just want to run to this slide real quick, because this is what that point is talking about. We never thought in taking and distributing the survey that we were going to have young people that said that the police were honest. We never thought that we were going to have young people who said that the police were fair. But what this information did do for us is show us that we need to have different systems in play that can create this sort of safety or idea of protection that the police has been in charge of creating, I guess. And so this research is very nuanced, and how we take this information and how we frame it is going to be very nuanced in and of itself. Following that, we realized that young people have the right to research, just like we have this policy that we're pushing in New York called the Right to Know Act. Young people have the right to know and produce that knowledge, I think someone on an earlier panel was talking about how young people are seen as incompetent and, unable to be the givers of information and the resource providers. And that's what we fundamentally did with this project. Like I said earlier, changing that motto of cisgendered white adult men practicing research on communities and taking those people who would be practiced on and have them do the practicing.
And then just to, listening to organizers, what it really means for me to be an organizer is just to be a mentor, right? And then just kind of build the capacity and then move over and let the young people step up and take that. And in doing that is creating a culture, right? Me and Darian run Know Your Right trainings all over the city. So what are your rights? What are the do's and don'ts? What are the myths and actualities between what you can do if you're stopped by a police officer and what you cannot? What are your rights? And though these are your rights, what are the realities, right? So in New York City, by law, you do not have to present an ID. But if you don't, what happens? There is a chance it can escalate. There's a chance you're brought into bookings. There is that option. So then what happens next? As well as we're part of a cop watch team. And what that means is we go out in groups in neighborhoods that are targeted and record police activity. You have the right to record and see that activity. And in the recordings, you kind of get to see the demeanor of certain officers change. Now, it isn't a bash toward all police officers. It isn't a dislike necessarily. It's more of a grand need of a systemic culture change in the NYPD, how they, interact with people, and what happens when there is a lack of accountability system in place, because that is what we're looking at every single day.
And then we have that youth are at the forefront of this movement. Like Adilka was saying, young people have been leading the marches and the protests. I mean, when I went out to Ferguson, I saw nothing but beautiful young black and brown bodies out on the street, out saying that this is something that we're not going to stand for. When I go to these meetings, it's young people who have the most to say about how we should reform our policies. So young people are not just standing passively by. Young people are not just sitting on their hands and being apathetic and not caring. Young people are actually out here doing something, developing data, developing a culture of change and accountability.
Yep. And the rest is pretty much because we're probably at time. We had just had the opportunity to have university resources. It's not often you get to go into a graduate center and have folks want to sit down and teach you how to do this research, right? So we were lucky to have that relationship with folks, as well as skill building, right? Like a lot of our young people reach high school and can't read and write because of the lack of resources in schools, because of the way the school to prison pipeline affects, amongst a bunch of stuff, right? And it's really building these skills for these young people as they continue to go through high school, go to secondary education. And then really the importance of just caring intergenerationally, intersectionally. Everything is connected. Whether it impacts you directly or not, it affects you, it affects someone you care about. And this gives us the opportunity to come together and really think about long-term solutions and build solidarity, because the movement isn't going anywhere, right? So it's just thinking about, sustainability and what it means to keep passing this on for folks once, they're newer leaders and the capacity is different. Thank you.
Thanks.